Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Embolden, the show where we talk about controversial issues in comics and pop culture in an adult way. And obviously, this sort of stemmed out of a bunch of different things that I think are going on in comics, pop culture. Ownership is a big deal. Obviously, this came out of what happened. And I'm going to mention a dirty name, Steven Crowder and the Daily Wire issue. This also came out of the fact that that 90s show just came out on Netflix as well, and a few other things. And we are talking about why ownership of your content is so important. And so I figured that I would speak with my friend Chris Brown about this from Laughing Road Comics. But before we dive into this topic, get controversial about it, I do want to give you a chance to self-promote yourself at the start of the show, and I'll let you also self-promote at the end.
Okay. So yeah, we got quite a few things going on, quite a few things coming. Of course, we're doing the Indie Comics Battleground. That is the official name of it now. That new card game coming up from Max and Atrocity Press. We're doing his thing. We have Gone Hunting that's being printed right now. We have a few trade shows and some conventions that we'll be going to this year. I have the Slaughterville Book 3 ready. Slaughterville 4 is coming, as well as many other games this year. So we're going to be quite busy. We'll be hanging out more.
Yeah. You got a lot of stuff with Laughing Grow coming out, and I just figured that I would give everybody a heads up so that obviously they get an idea. But I definitely want to dive into this, and I kind of preface this by talking about ownership, and certain events have happened in the last, I feel, 6 weeks that have put this into the spotlight. And obviously, I'm a big proponent of ownership as far as my content, where I am not part of a network for a lot of reasons, because I want to own my content. And I think it's very important. And this is just my stance as an individual, where I want to own my content on my YouTube channel, because the potential on me licensing out my podcast or my videos or putting sponsorship money into it or getting sponsors means that it is an infinite amount of return. And I think a lot of creators actually do not understand when you go and sign a contract for your book or for other things. And so I'm very curious your stance on this before we get into it, because it is complicated and there are reasons why you shouldn't own something, but there's also reasons why you should, and when and where you should do all this stuff.
My stance is, if I'm making it for somebody else, you hired me to produce a product, and then you own it. So that is yours then. Just like if I pay for art, you might have produced it, but that's my art now. I own it. I bought it. So yeah, I believe ownership is very important. I think you should try to do what you can to maintain ownership, unless you decide you want to sell it. And if you do sell it, please, dear God, read the fine print.
Yeah, I think it gets tricky. So, I mean, it's not a secret that obviously I'm doing something with Greg Bo Watson with a trading card, and I don't know how much the details I can go into. I might be crossing a line, but it's going to come out soon enough anyway. And I actually don't know who owns the art, but I know that I own all the trading cards with it. And so it's a limited run of 25 not safe for work trading cards. And he doesn't own one. Now, I'm a nice guy. I'm going to send him one, because I think it's just good business to, obviously, hey, man, I'll just take care of you. I'll give you one out of the 24. I'm not going to charge you for it. But he doesn't own any of that. But he might own the original art, but he doesn't own the right to reproduce it. And that's one of the things that is really, I guess, appetizing for me in that deal, because it allows me to have a lot of control, because I own the rights to not reproduce it, but to have it stopped. And that's a form of ownership too that I think people don't understand. And I think it's very interesting. And I think people have to really understand that when you own something, you control the monetization of it. And we are in a very interesting monetization world right now, where everything and anything can be monetized. And I think that's the mistake that creators make. And so I'm very curious how you view it, because you have a podcast. I have a podcast. I have no desire to own your podcast in any sense. If you were to come and stream one of them every month, I don't want to own it, but it gets complicated once we start diving into, monetization rights, because that's also different than ownership rights.
Right. Absolutely. Sure. Again, this. Go back to the art for just 1 second. Whenever I purchase the art, I do give them the permission to use it in portfolios, so that they can still, say what they've done. But as far as the monetization goes, like you were saying, no, that's mine. You don't get that. And or with the show, like you said, if you want to bring a show onto the once a month or however often you decide you want to do it with somebody, it should be either ad revenue sharing or you're licensing it directly. In other words, if you license it, then you pay for the ads, you get the payment from the ads because you've already paid for the content. So, and then that is a big difference, right? How is the fee structure formulated? Is it done on I'm going to license it, therefore I can put the ads in, and then I get all the revenue from it, which makes sense, or is it I'm going to be on here and it's going to be a split?
Yeah, so I'm actually in the process of working out and it's not an ownership thing. It's more of we're splitting the royalty or the payment where it's a 50-50 after fees get taken out with somebody in a business that I'm starting. And so me and a bunch of people are splitting what they bring in on the content on what sells. And so she's going to get 50%. So if $500 sells, she gets 250, I get 250. And it's a 50-50 ad split, or let's say it's 240. It's an ad split. So I don't know who owns it, but I think we both own it, but it's going to be that it's exclusive on said platform, but we're sharing the revenue. And I think it's very interesting at this point. I think this is where this gets very, very complicated, where it's how do you want to structure something? I also think there's a concept where you could just buy somebody. So I'm not opposed to paying somebody, $2,000 a year to produce me 12 shows. So I'm interested in actually doing something very cool where I want somebody to go through the complete history of Kingdom Hearts and
Nice.
maybe do like a 4 or 6 part documentary and maybe do, 12 hours, and I would pay them $2,000 to $3,000 to do it. But I want to own the content, but I'm buying the content. So they don't get any ad revenue. They don't get anything out of that. They don't get a claim to it. They get credited for it. They could be done or narrated, or this documentary was produced by so-and-so, but I bought the rights to it. And I think that's something that's also doable. And look, there's a good reason why somebody might want to do that. And there's nothing wrong with that because it's just a job for them. Versus maybe they'll say, look, I'll work for free, but I want a 50-50 ad revenue. And I think this is where this really gets complicated in comics right now, especially, and even podcasts and things of that nature, because it's what is going to give you the biggest bang for your dollar. And also, we are going into very, very much everybody is a content producer. So it's such an interesting topic, because when you start joining networks and you start giving your content to other people, so I'll use me and you. Obviously, we don't have a business relationship as far as me hosting a show on my YouTube channel at the moment right now. That's not to say that we don't, but if you go on to somebody's network, do they own your content once you go and put it on there? Or do they even have a claim to it? And it's not, obviously I know a bunch of people who do this, and we don't have to mention names, but what claim do they have to said item? And that's where this gets really tricky.
And that, this is something that's really important to me, to be honest with you. You didn't know anything about this when you asked about doing this topic. But a long time ago, somebody actually, because they did some of the art for my first board game, decided they were going to try to claim the ownership of it. I said, fella, no, I own this. I've been making this game long before I knew you. You did the art for it. Congratulations, thanks. Here's your money, but you don't own any of this. And it's the same thing with a show. And it all depends on what the structure was when it was first set. If somebody asks me, hey, can I put your show on my network? Or can I put a story in a backup story in your issue, you don't own the issue then, or you don't own the show then. You were just asking permission to rebroadcast or reuse. That's very important for especially new people who are not used to this. Get that stuff in writing. Make it clear. I always make it clear right away what the ownership structure is. It is so important. Like again, if you were to do something with me, okay, and you needed a special show like that, the Kingdom Hearts one. I like Kingdom Hearts. I played it original. I don't know the lore like most people do. Okay, but if you were to ask me to do it, that would be you contracting me for a product. You would own that then. However, if you said to me, "Hey, can I rebroadcast the Outdoors Indoors?" Well, we made that. We own that, but we'll license it to you. We'll let you rebroadcast. And now here's the thing, though. What you were saying about that Kingdom Hearts thing, and that's why the ownership thing is so important. If you don't say that you own it, they might try to rebroadcast it on their own channel, taking views and money away from yours. Which that's why the ownership issue is so important.
It's so complicated, and even when you go to a network, and obviously, I know a bunch of people. It's not just one. This is where it gets very, very complicated. Is that it's cool if I'm now streaming on a network. Does that network have a claim to it? And
Right.
if there's no contract, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to go and parse out legality, but it gets very complicated. Who has a claim? What has a claim? And then even, I'll throw something crazier out. What if you get contracted to become a host for something and now you're on that network? I mean, you as the host, if you don't have a contract, do you own that content or do you not own that content if it's somebody else's show? And that's the other thing too, is that what claim do you have as a host? Obviously, I own, Pop Anime Comics. I own Conversations in Pop Culture.
Sure.
I own this show. So as the host, I own this, right? But if I was to go and find somebody and it's still, I own the whole network or I own the show, but then does that host own it? And that's where I think this gets very, very interesting, because what claims does somebody have to it when there's no contract? And I think that's one of the biggest problems right now that exists in this sector.
Again, my thing is always going to be set that up ahead of time. If it's your show and you're allowing somebody to host, or you've brought somebody in to host it, it's still your show. You just have somebody hosting. However, if somebody brings their content over to you and it's just a rebroadcast or a sharing, then you should still make sure it's clear that you still own the product. You still own the content, and you can pull it at any time.
Yeah, and I mean, I like to play devil's advocate too, because this is what I like doing, and this is where this I also think gets tricky, is that even if because one of the things that obviously I struggle with is if I'm to go and license somebody's content out, I'm gonna want to put it onto a 2 or 3 year term.
Yep.
And I really want that, because I want enough room to get, I guess, money on the bone. And I think everybody can make money on licensing. I think everybody can make money on ad revenue sharing. I think everybody can make money in 14 different ways, or just hiring somebody you can make money on. And I think it is very important to understand that if I'm to go license, the indoors, outdoors, I'm going to want to put that onto a 2 or 3 year term for a reason, because I want exclusivity so that I could have, 150 episodes for a set amount of time. Because the more episodes I have over time, the more, or conversely, if I have 3 years and you have 150 episodes and they all come out at the same time, there's more room for revenue sharing, or I'm licensing it from you, or I'm repurposing it, or whatever I'm doing. If I have 3 years, I can make my return on it. And that's where this gets also tricky, is that I think a lot of people don't understand that you need to make money as the owner of the content, but also I need to make money as the purchaser of the content. And I think this is where it gets tricky as well, to some degree.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to set it up real clearly. Are you licensing the rights to rebroadcast, or are you licensing the rights to broadcast? In other words, you're the only spot where it's going to be seen. So then all of that traffic is now, instead of going somewhere else, is now coming to you. Yeah. Do you want to be second hand, or do you want to be first? That's and how is the fee structure going to be applied? Like you said, if you're licensing the product for exclusivity, then as long as no revenue sharing was discussed, then you keep it all for yourself, which again would be expected.
It's very much what the Daily Wire wanted to do with Steven Crowder. For those who don't know, and obviously I think we're all adults here, whether you're a conservative, Democrat, I don't think that's the issue at hand with this. And I think it's actually very important to actually talk about that too, because what Crowder was upset about is the fact that any content he would produce under the Daily Wire's banner would be owned by them in perpetuity. And that's a big issue. And I was speaking with somebody, John Westhoff, last night, and he was looking at a contract, and they wanted to own his comic in perpetuity, even after they stopped publishing it. So they wanted the rights to the comic or a piece of it in perpetuity. And that's the other thing, even going outside of broadcasting, that I think people have to understand about ownership, is that you go to a company, and we're not going to name a company, we'll call company X for lack of a better word. And they want to own, your book in perpetuity, even after they stop publishing it. There gets an issue. And I think that's something that a lot of creators don't understand either, is that when you're now starting to deal with the word perpetuity, it's complicated as well, because do you really want to give that up? But if that company's going to give you an advance of $50,000 and they want perpetuity, $50,000 is a lot of money up front. So, I mean, I think that's something that a lot of creators have to really understand. And I think that a lot of people are not familiar with how any of this works.
Yeah. And back to the Crowder Daily Wire thing. They were never going to be a good fit to begin with. Personality wise, like they're already bleeping like the Michael Knowles show and things for when he talks about certain topics, and they're already bleeping him. They would never last with Crowder. He would be banned from everything. There would be the quote unquote fines and things that would happen. So they were just never a good fit. It's drama in order to create drama. Now, as far as owning the comic book thing in perpetuity, that thing does always kind of make me nervous, because just like what's going on now, and I'm not sure if you're aware of this, they are actually retroactively going back and editing content, editing books, comics, movies, and so on for quote unquote problematic issues. So then therefore, can you as the creator come back and say, that's not my work anymore?
So Ben Dunn actually put something up, and I don't think it was necessarily the greatest argument, but he said that if an editor ever did, there should be a gigantic label on it. I forget the exact words, but it should be a big explicit label in like all caps, and saying that, this is not the original work of the author. But I do think that sometimes you should edit, certain things. I don't think editing something, if it's really problematic, is the worst thing in the world, but it also raises questions on saying, wait a second, like if you're editing Gone with the Wind, I mean, Gone with the Wind is an excellent movie. Are we more advanced in society than when Gone with the Wind's time was? Of course we are. But should we be editing historical, works?
I don't think we should. I don't think we should be editing any of it. It let it stand for what it is. Hell, I hated when they added the extra special effects to Star Wars. Should have left it the original, I am a purist as far as that goes. This is the way the original creator intended. Now, don't get me wrong, with Star Wars, Lucas did it himself, and he has every right to do it. But somebody should not come in. But then it comes down to ownership. If that company owns the product, they do have the right technically to go back and edit it because they own it. It's just I would not want anybody editing let's say Conan the Barbarian, Robert E. Howard stuff, it would kill it. It would destroy the story.
So let's actually talk about this. So obviously you own, the indoors outdoors, and
Absolutely.
I don't think that you want somebody to come in and edit it,
Right.
unless you decide to edit. And look, I've edited interviews where and I'll give an example of what I mean, but I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. I've had a gap where there's been 10 minutes where me and my guests were just not connecting, where
Right.
their internet was down. So when I reshoot it out, I'll take out those 10 minutes of just dead silence, but that's an edit. That technically is an edit, but it's not editing content. But or conversely, I've noticed sometimes people obviously have a black background right now, but if I was to edit this and I put a purple background, that's an edit. But I don't think that's a massive edit. But if all of a sudden I then sell this and then somebody wants to go and edit it, I think it raises questions. I think it's very complicated. But if they license it out and they want to edit it and they're paying me for it, I mean, it's tricky in that regard too, because I'll be very honest. I mean, running a show, running 2 shows, I understand that I have to make X amount of money to keep me afloat.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the thing too that I think is really interesting in that regard.
Right.
But I also think that there's a difference where, I mean, look, they've remastered Star Wars.
Yeah.
I think I'll give an example. I'll use a better example. James Bond was remastered. There were shots where the camera was in the mirror and they took those out.
That's
Is that challenging purist? Yes, but is that a good edit? Probably.
right.
And so, this is where but they have the right to do it.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's the thing. And also, though, I think you can watch the original too.
Yeah.
So,
And yeah, like you said, if you go in and you edit and you cut out like that 10 minutes of silence, or you decide you want your background to be purple or green or fluorescent orange or blue or whatever you want, that's okay. But my issue with edits, and again, let's stick with the interview thing, because it goes along. It's still a story issue. If you edit your question, if you say your question and then cut a different piece from what I said and make it sound like I said something I didn't, that's a wrong edit. That's an edit that I would have a vital issue with. And that's kind of what they're doing to stories, is they're taking pieces of story out and completely rewriting it to the point where it changes the story itself.
and doesn't this become an issue when a network hires a host, but that host doesn't own the content? So I'll give you an example. I don't think Michael Knowles will use the Daily Wire. I think everybody's an adult who's going to see this. Michael Knowles might not own the Michael Knowles show.
Mm-hmm.
So technically speaking, I don't think they would do this. I think it would be spotted relatively quickly. But what if they then basically he has to question on a show and they edited a different response to it? And that's where this, I think, gets complicated. And look, this is not the only person, in this.
Right.
I mean, I could think of 5 people, the 5 people I'm thinking about that have other people on their networks.
Mm-hmm.
And, who owns that content. And it's very, very, very complicated when you go into that, because technically speaking, they can go and edit it. And, that's where it goes down to. And I think it's very, very, very dangerous.
Yeah.
Always.
Right. And that ownership part, again, I'm glad you brought it back to it, is important. Do you own the words that you say when you're on somebody else's network, or when you write for somebody else's work? Which again gets into legality of, if they change something, can you be sued for it? If they make it sound like you said something you didn't say and it becomes a legal issue, can you then be liable for it?
It's interesting. I was speaking with Pat Shand. I don't know if you know who Pat Shand is by any chance.
It sounds so familiar.
Pat Shand writes for Zenoscope. He does Destiny New York.
Okay.
He did Cheeky. He's doing like a Kickstarter every single month, and he does maybe 30,000-40,000 per Kickstarter. So he is quote unquote a professional in comics.
Yeah.
I think is a good way to put it. Nice guy. He's been on my show a bunch of times. I love Pat Chand. Um, what he has with Destiny New York is that he basically put in the contract with Black Mask. They can't change anything. But with the other stuff that he's doing for Black Mask, it's up for negotiation, which is fine. So, but he basically said, look, I'm already further enough in Destiny New York, and now it's coming out in single issues. You guys can't change anything in this book. But if we want to have a discussion on a new property, that's fine. But that goes to ownership, meaning that he's basically said, look, I'm on volume 6 here. You can't change anything. Now, they could change a cover, but that's a little bit different where I think Pat might want a cover changed, or he might not want to use the graphic novel covers because he wants to keep those exclusive, which makes sense. Or, if they want to make a bigger issue, that's fine. But you cannot change if Logan McBride uses the F word. You know what I mean? Like, you cannot bleep that out in Destiny New York. They're going to have to suck it up. Versus in a new project he does, if they say, we don't want you to curse, that's up for negotiations.
Exactly.
That's a really interesting, point about ownership is that it's crystal clear on Destiny New York. Pat owns it, and he set the terms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. That is really what it comes down to is, am I writing for you, or are you publishing and producing something that I wrote? If I am writing for you, because I write, I can't draw to save my life. If I'm writing for you and I'm writing a story for you, you have every right to dictate it. You have every right, like an editor, to say, I don't like where this is going. I want it to go a different way. It's my job then to fix it or to change it to where it doesn't matter what my vision for it was. You wanted this story a certain way. However, if I write a story, I own it, and then I bring it to you to publish. It's still my story. It's just we're also putting it out with you.
Yeah, and I think obviously, things can be negotiated and obviously ownership and all that stuff. So, and look, it's like if it will be that maybe your story and you're bringing it to me and you're shopping it to me, we're not a good fit, and that could happen too. And so it's very interesting in that front, and I think that that's something that is very important that people need to understand. I mean, look, if I'm to go back to the Kingdom Hearts thing, if I'm to produce that documentary and I'm paying for it, I'm not going to tell somebody how to do their job, but I might say, look, I want this to be a little bit more kids friendly.
Exactly.
Or I'm not going to limit your parameters, but we can't go beyond 12 hours,
right.
but I'm hiring you to do that and I'm paying you X amount of money versus, or I'll give you an example. Let's say you and me are building a show. And I say, hey, Chris, I want you to do once a month, Dungeons and Dragons, but, I want it to definitely be inclusive, right? And it's a brand new show. You might be owning the content, but I'm saying, does this interest you in that regard? But I'm obviously saying, is this going to work?
Right.
With this? And so, I think that's the other thing too, is that, and that's where it goes down to, or I might just buy you out completely and tell you what I want, which might also work effectively. So, it's all about, I feel, structuring.
Yeah. And again, and it's a good, I like how you brought that example of the RPG show. Not that we have anything planned or anything. It's just, it's nice because as you mentioned, if you are, if I already have a show, and I have it set a certain way and you just want to license it out, you get it as it is. But if you're hiring someone to come on and produce a show for your shot, you can definitely say, let it be inclusive, let it be a certain way, because that's what you want to represent on your platform, right? And that's perfectly fine, or that's the Kingdom Hearts thing. Let's go back to that. If you were to contract me, let's say to do or someone, whoever, I don't care, to do a piece on the Constitution, just again popping into my head, your vision for it is that was a good example, because you could say, I want it tailored to scholars, regular adults, adults who don't know, to children. And it's one of the things I like to teach in my speech classes, or my writing classes, is about tailoring to the audience. Who do you want this to be for? Who are you trying to attract with your writing? You're not gonna, if you try to write a high level piece on Shakespeare, you're not going to interest children at all. But you can write it in a way that it does interest even a kindergarten class. It all depends on how it's structured, and that's the important thing you got to make clear when you're hiring someone to do these kinds of projects.
Yeah, no, I think it's.
Sorry, I talk a lot. I'm sorry. I'll shut up.
No. But you're bringing up a good point, and this is the whole thing, and this is why I want to have these conversations, because I think there is a very, gray line. I think people are terrified to talk about ownership, right? Mm-hmm. So I like to own things, and I'll even go further into the business of it. So Netflix owns that 90s show; they don't own that 70s show. NBC technically owns The Office, but Peacock doesn't own The Office. Peacock paid $500 million for 5 years for The Office. That's a lot of money. The reason why I left Netflix is that they didn't want to pay $100 million a year for it, which is what it's worth. And it's worth every penny of it, no doubt about it. The point is that in today's age, we are very much in an ownership world where a lot of shows on Netflix, Hulu, everything on Disney is owned by Disney. At this stage, when Netflix produces something like Cowboy Bebop or that 90s show, they own it. Versus it used to be that 70s show is licensed now to Peacock for X amount of years. And I think that's something that people have to fully understand. And I think a lot of creators, just in general, both on podcasting and comics, media, documentaries, they don't understand this, and they don't want to have conversations about it, because this is not fun. And it's also very, very, very difficult to have a conversation saying, I would like to own my content and just license it to you.
Yeah. And again, I've been on a lot of sides of this, and it's been a really interesting thing, because I've been hired to make board games. Even before the thing with Max, I've done it before because I'm good at it. And I don't own that content, and I fully accept it. But on the other side of it, I went to New Line Cinema. Really good people, by the way. Not going to say anything bad about them. To license Freddy and Jason for Slaughterville, right? Because how cool would that have been, right? But at that time, I was just starting, and I didn't have $50,000. But they are I got to say, they have a good license agreement laid out clearly. It's for this many years, this many countries, unless you want worldwide, which I did. Which is why it was probably $50,000 for Freddy and Jason. But then they also send you a booklet with art. You can only use these images, these fonts, these stills, because that's what we've already. And it comes back to the show thing, royalties. If you lease a show from somebody or license a show from somebody, do you have to pay royalties to anybody in that show? For instance, you have a show now, and oh my gosh, who was the guy that was just on? You were talking. I'm sorry.
Brian Donovan.
I believe so. Now
you don't owe the voice of Rock Lee.
Yes, you don't owe him royalties if you rebroadcast that show, because it's understood in the meantime you own the show. He's a guest on it, and that's the end of it. That's how the relationship is going to work. But that is something that people may need to consider. Who else is in a produced show? How is that fee structured? Sorry, I get ranting, and I get excited about it. I do enjoy this.
No, it's so interesting, and obviously, I mean, in the interview world, I think it's an understanding between a lot of people that you're doing an interview. I own the content, yes. But I mean, I don't have an agreement with anybody, but I'm a decent enough human being. I've been doing this forever, that everybody understands that my position is aligned with you as a guest.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's not the case. but I want this interview to do well. But I also cut up an interview, and I think it's well understood that on TikTok or in shorts that there's no royalty here. But
Yeah.
I don't think these people want a royalty. I think they
Right.
want exposure.
Yes.
And it's the same thing. I was just on a show talking about how to take a distribution out of a business. I have no claim to that show.
Mhm.
And I'm happy to give my time. I didn't get any money for it. I'm happy to produce it. If they want to cut up clips and it makes the guy like $1 million because I said something really insightful, I don't care because I got really good exposure. I've been on shows that have gone and reached, 150,000 people. What did I care that the guy had advertising and he made money off of me? It was an understanding that I was cool with. It doesn't bother me that I don't own that content.
Right.
Um, and that if he wants to edit it or cut it up a certain way, I mean, technically he can. Um, and then I mean, but I've also been where I was on somebody's show and they sent me a weird agreement saying they own certain things. And I said,
Yeah.
whoa, I'm not signing this
Yeah.
where they own my likeness. And I was like, dude, I'm not signing that. And the person didn't mean any harm by it. But I think what they were trying to get at and trying to get in the sign saying, you can't claim royalties against me on this interview if I monetize it. I don't think they were trying to basically buy my cute little elf.
Yeah.
I think that they were doing something and they were trying to just say, hey, you can't claim it. I said, dude, I'm not going to claim anything against you. If you want me to sign an agreement saying that you monetize this interview and you use my name to monetize and you make $1 million off of this interview, that's fine. But I think it's very interesting because you come on this and you don't own this content, even though you're a part of it.
Right. And again, just like when we first started, I purchased a couple of slots to come on and talk about the books and the games and so on. But it was clear that just because I was purchasing the service or the time, there was never any ownership that was transferred. It was the rights to come on the show is what it was.
I mean, look, you know what it is? I mean, if somebody said to me, I'm very honest about this. I've had people cut up spots and things, and then they credit me, and I've never claimed anything against anybody. A guy named Tommy Bell, who I'm very good friends with, who does as an artist. He's been doing a lot of stuff, does a lot of stuff for LFC, Lingerie Fighting Championship. I met Tommy because I was cut up in an interview and I wasn't credited. What did I do? I didn't call it out. I was like, cool. That
Yep.
doesn't bother me because I was like, this is good exposure. And then
Mhm.
I was credited later on in the comment section. It's like, oh snap, I didn't credit you. I'm like, dude, like it's not a big deal. If you cut up a 30-second clip from my interview, I don't care
Yeah.
because that's not stealing ownership from me.
Right.
But again, if somebody wanted a clip, so Lou Fisto is a good example of this. She wanted the interview. I'm like, cool. You can put the interview up on your YouTube thing. I don't view that as stealing ownership, where I don't think she has a claim, in my opinion, to that interview, even though it's on her YouTube channel. And what do I care? Because it's good exposure. So somebody said, Andrew, I want an interview we did. I mean, it depends on the circumstance, but I might say, yeah, what do you want to do with it? And she's like, oh, Lou Fisto was like, I want to put it on my YouTube channel. I'm like, okay, that's fine, because it still said conversations and pop culture on the top of it, and nothing was edited in it. So that's how I view it. But again, if you wanted like an interview and you bought the spots, depending on who asks and when they ask, I mean, everything is negotiable.
Right. And yeah, if I were to ever, and again, sharing, like hitting the share button is different from rebroadcasting, right? But if I were to ever to say, hey, can I get a copy of this interview, like the one for today? Let's just use that as an example. If I were to say, can I get this, and can I also host it? I would, the first thing I would always do is to ensure to give proper credit. But again, that's just the way that I was taught, and anti-plagiarism style, but always give credit to the proper ownership. That's just the way I was It's
Yeah,
just
no, I mean, my whole thing when Lufisto asked, I didn't even balk. I said, "Yeah, yeah. What do you want it for?" I asked that question because I thought it was a good question to ask, right?
Mhm.
Saying, "Why do you want this interview?" Just curiosity. But it's Lufisto, and anybody who knows Lufisto, she's a one of the top female wrestlers ever. She's a pioneer in the women's wrestling division. It was a great interview. I think it did like 1,200 views in like a day and a half. Great
Nice.
interview, very privileged, and I was happy to, grant it to her. But again, if you ask and you want something, or somebody says, "Hey, I really like the short you did on TikTok. Can I have that short to throw on mine or on my Instagram?" And I'm not on Instagram pushing out. I'm like, "Yeah, sure," because it doesn't impact me. But then again, that might change.
Let me ask you. Here's something that I've been wondering. Okay, let's say you. I'm just going to use myself as an example because I know I can't get in trouble with myself. Let's say I ask you for an interview, okay, and I give you the through the buy the coffee or however we do it. You know how we do things. Hell, I've known you for what over a year now, almost 2 years, something like
Probably
that.
2.5, 2.5, give or
Yeah,
take.
it's crazy. But anyway, um, so let's say I do that. Then you also bring on another guest with us, which I never have a problem with. By the way, if you want to bring on more people with us, that's great. But what if the other person gets belligerent and then the guest asks you to kick them off? Would you do it?
Oh man,
Isn't
this
that a tricky sucker right there? I tell you what. I tell you what. That is neat, huh? I thought about that one a lot because I've had that happen where
I
guests
don't
come.
know. I don't know though the what I would do because I'm usually in control.
Yeah.
And look, it depends on what's going on. I mean, I've been the belligerent one. Um I was going through some stuff at certain points.
Yeah.
But I've matured and I've killed it. Also, I've been on shows where I've just been out of it and not even belligerent, but we're like, Andrew's not there today. And I've been that guy too.
Yeah.
And that happens too, where people are like, "Dude, you're really quiet today. This is what's going on." But you know, I mean, it is what it is. I don't know what I would do actually. It depends on the circumstance.
Because you own the content, right?
Yes.
But I paid to be on it. So now this other guest is now being um, contradictory, belligerent, however you'd like to say it, distracting maybe. And so how would we handle that? Because again, I've actually had that happen. Not to where like, do I boot this person or do I let them stay and talk? If it's a good conversation, I might let them stay. Like if just because they're arguing doesn't mean it's bad content, right? Controversy creates cash. The great Eric Bischoff.
Yes. It also depends on who it is, though. I'll give an example, right? So let's say that I'll use a friend of mine, Raven Gregory. Let's say Raven has gone crazy. He's going on a crazy rant, but it's entertaining as hell, right? And it's Raven Gregory, and Raven's done a lot of things in comics that are very important to this day. And all of a sudden it's going down a negative hill, but it's not crossing a line, but it's not great, but it's entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that I can also cut up pieces of this. I might let it play out for a little bit, but I'll give another example. There was a incident at a con where something was said that crossed the line that shouldn't have been said, and it was like 5 minute mini panels, and then the hosts were gonna then launch pick a winner, and then they would pay for them to host the panel the next year at the same con, and a line was
Mm-hmm.
crossed that was clear. Then that's where you stop it, where something
Mm-hmm.
was said that shouldn't have been said. So if I say, I'll give you an example. If I say, "Oh, board games are stupid," and that's not a disqualifier. If
Right.
I say your company is a failure and that I can't think of, I don't want to say anything offensive. So let me rewind for 1 second. But if I cross a line, everybody knows what crossing a line is, then you might just kick somebody out and just continue and move onward. And so I mean, but again, that's I try to avoid these problems. I vet my guests for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
I have somebody, if they pay to be on my show or they're supporting the show, I make sure that they understand that I'm like, hey, cool. Is it cool if we bring on so and so guest? I've had people ask to come on comic book hangouts that I used to host, and
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel comfortable bringing them on to the stream with the other bunch of people because I think it would have ruined the flow. And I was like, this is going to become contentious
Yeah.
and it's going to become problematic. And again, I own the content, so I try to cut those problems off before they occur.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, I've been on with people who have been that cantankerous, contentious, contradictory. I wonder how many C words we can get out of that. Anyway, and it's it has to be a personal line that you have to set where if you can tiptoe up to it, and that like you said, good content and all drama, right?
I mean, I'll give an example. I was on a show and I took a very controversial opinion on something,
Sure.
but I wasn't disrespectful, but I was there to be controversial,
Mm-hmm.
and I was talking about, in particular, AI art. And I was taking a very, very thing, but I wasn't snapping at anybody. I was very calm. I was very respectful to everybody in the room, and nobody was angry with me for the 15 minutes they were speaking about it, and they were saying, "I get your point." And the way I handled it is I was very monotone. I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
exciting. I kept it nice and boring. My arguments, I kept them simple, and I let them speak. I spoke, and I basically was not disrespectful. There's a difference between being very contrary and being very opinionated versus being, I guess, vicious or mean.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so nobody was going to kick me out on that content, but I don't own that content, and
Right.
there you go. But then we spoke about issues of podcast stuff and then comic book investing and some other stuff. So
Yeah.
the point is that it wasn't the whole interview, but there's nothing wrong with being contrary. In fact, I like when people are contrary. I
Yeah.
mean, I had the first episode of this show was about AI art, and me and my guest, we didn't disagree, but we definitely were coming at it from two different angles,
Mm-hmm.
having a really good conversation about it.
I said to someone the other day that I was hoping I didn't cut you off because it stopped and I realized, oh crap, I think it might have just froze for a second. I don't want to cut you off. But I said to someone the other day, I said, if you buy something from Etsy, you can't complain about AI art. Because the big complaint about AI art is it's stealing somebody else's work and reusing it and not giving credit and so on and so on. I said, but if you're buying from Etsy and they're using Marvel products, DC products, and so on, you're doing the same thing. Somebody else is using the art to create a product. You are purchasing it. And that kind of got people upset. But that's a good upset because if it forces you to think and look at a topic a different way, it's okay to upset people. Offended doesn't mean wrong.
I don't even use the word offended.
Exactly.
The whole thing with me and even with ownership and going back to this, bringing it all up, I want to have conversations. The whole point of
Mm-hmm.
this show is a conversation about issues.
Yep.
Ownership is so important, right? Because at this point, I mean, look, I buy stuff off of Etsy all the time. Now, some of it's original stuff, some of it's not. Like Mount Olympus uses an Etsy store. They're producing an original comic with certain cover art. That's not AI art. But I'll
Right.
give you an example that I think fits your argument really well. Let's say somebody says I can engrave any anime character onto a glass. Now,
Mm-hmm.
are they doing something and engraving it onto it or have a machine that can do it? Yes. So is there a skill there that's being utilized? Yeah. How transformative is that if I send them an image of Naruto, right? Or I'll throw something else out there that's fun that I just pulled yesterday. Beth Phoenix, right? Pretty cool, right? A big wrestling fan. So let's say that I have a picture of Beth Phoenix, right? I want it engraved on a glass. To some degree, there is a component of stealing in there, but there's also a component of skill, and it's how transformative it is. And
Sure, but
that's where ownership gets complicated too. Is that does WWE own the likeness to Beth Phoenix? Does Beth Phoenix own the likeness to Beth Phoenix, or does Edge own the likeness to Beth Phoenix? That's a joke, guys. In case
yeah,
you didn't know, Edge and Beth Phoenix are actually married, and I think they have 2 daughters.
yeah.
So that's a joke, and they're a great power couple in WWE. They're like the
But
Miz and Maurice. They're exactly like that. But anyway, continue.
but that's what I was getting at. Just like you were saying, like if you had that thing engraved on the glass and you wrote Beth's bathwater on your glass, whatever, and that's the exact same thing as the AI art taking it. Yes, both of them are transformative. They are changing the original. So even though they don't own the original, they're both making changes to it, and there was skill involved in creating the code behind AI. But all I was saying was if you're against AI art, you have to be the same against things like Etsy that are taking somebody else's work, repurposing it, and claiming it as making a profit off of it. Now, if they were doing AI art for free, that'd be one other thing. But it's still funny that they charge you for it when they didn't. That's a whole different story.
I think even to go to ownership, though, it goes to that too. I mean, I'll give a crazy example, right? I mean, ownership, even to go further into this, I mean, if you are the host of a show that you don't own, but do you own what your likeness of you being on that show? So, for instance, obviously, I own Conversations in Pop Culture. I own Pop Anime Comics. I own that stuff. So I own myself essentially.
Sure.
But if all of a sudden, if you, if you become, let's say I have the weekly wrap up, right? And then I make you a host. Do you own your likeness on the weekly wrap up if you don't own the show, if you're the host? Now, it's a little bit different if you're a guest host. So I'll give an example. George Lopez is guest hosting for Jimmy Kimmel every once in a while, right? I don't think you can make an argument that, Jimmy Kimmel owns George Lopez's for that week that he's on vacation or
Right.
or having a Corolla. I think that's contract negotiated. It's a week. Nobody's going to pick that fight. But if you have a weekly wrap up show, I mean, you might not own the show, but you own your likeness on that show. And that's a whole like meta into meta ownership argument, because what happens when you say, I want to leave that show? Can you use your likeness from that show into something else, but you don't own the show? And again, it's very complicated in this area because I don't know the answers unless it might not even be an issue technically.
And it's good you brought something like that up because who, again, if you want to talk Jimmy Kimmel or any of the other hosts, heck, Johnny Depp doesn't own Jack Sparrow. He played him. He was him in the movie, but he doesn't own Jack Sparrow. Now, Disney doesn't own, I mean, I guess they might own Johnny Depp, but that's a whole different topic. They don't own the person of Johnny Depp, but they own the character that he was playing. So if you own the show, you would own the character or the personality that was portrayed on the show, but not anything done after the show or any other likeness. You would own that content part of it. But I would make it clear you own the content part of it, but not any other aspect. If that makes sense.
It's complicated because
it is.
Kingdom Hearts, the reason why I brought up Kingdom Hearts, and then to bring this full circle to Kingdom Hearts, I mean, Jack Sparrow is in Kingdom Hearts, and it is based off of Johnny Depp. If you play Kingdom Hearts and you see Jack Sparrow, that is Johnny Depp. That's not, not Johnny Depp. Now, I don't think Orlando Bloom is in Kingdom Hearts because I don't think anybody really cares about him in that regard. I mean, I think Orlando Bloom is great. I love Orlando Bloom. But the point is that I think that when you see Jack Sparrow in Kingdom Hearts, like Johnny Depp, it's just an instant connection. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think it's very interesting because I think that Disney definitely owns, that, and they own that character and that portrayal.
Yep.
It's that 70s show. Whoever owns that 70s show owns Eric Foreman. They don't
Mm-hmm.
own Topher Grace and, as Eddie Brock and in Sony
Yeah.
and that
I've
portrayal.
never seen that 70s show.
It's great, man. It's a good show, but the point is that I think it's really interesting where that's where it gets tricky. I think
Yep.
too, because if you're hosting something for somebody, there you go, and then it gets crazier if you're on somebody's network and they approach you for their show. Do they then own your position if they're taking your show? And they're
Mm-hmm.
rebroadcasting it, do they own you as a character? And again, I don't know. I don't know because probably there's no contracts, which means it's no man's land.
Exactly. No contracts is so dangerous, especially for licensing products like this. You have to get it written out. You have to make it clear. Yeah, you have to let them know if you're willing to give up the rights to it, even if it's only, again, licensing for, usually it's 3 years. If you're willing to give up the rights to it for 2 to 3 years, you have to make darn sure, I didn't curse this time, that those rights revert back to you at the end of that licensing agreement. This is just it's how Bill Gates, I don't know if you know that, it's how Bill Gates built Microsoft. He didn't sell it. One, he bought it for 50 grand, or was it 5 grand? It was something really cheap off of some guy who knew coding, who actually wrote DOS. Then he bought DOS from this guy, licensed it to IBM, never sold it. So he was able to then license it to other people. And then, of course, he stole Apple's thing, took it to Japan, turned it into Windows. So, yeah.
So he pulled an Edison.
Yeah. Bill Gates is a thief. That's what I'm saying. You can clip that. I don't care. Hashtag Bill Gates is a thief.
Because it's just interesting. And obviously, I mean, I don't have
It's the ownership. It really does.
I've never been approached to join a network. I do not have a desire to. At this point, there's no good reason for me to do it. I'm doing just fine now.
Yeah.
At some point there was, I know people who license out their content, and I understand why they do it. And when you have a big enough, library, and look, I probably in the next 3 to 4 years, I'm going to be a candidate for licensure, just because I have a lot of content. When you have 1,000 interviews, you really are a candidate for licensing out things. Were you going to say something?
So, yeah, I do this so when I remember to say something. Now, if you were to license your content, right, because it comes all under the Pop Anime brand, okay? But you do interviews for wrestling. You do interviews for the comics, the cosplay, and so on. Would you license them out as a block? In other words, you get April through June, or would you license them out by topic? You get all the wrestling stuff, you get all the, and so on. You get the idea.
It could be done in a bunch of ways. It could be done in a bunch of ways. It could be done in seasons.
Yeah.
It could be done in content, just wrestling. It could be done even on a further level. It could be done by region in wrestling.
True.
If you really wanted to. So all of a sudden, I interviewed a bunch of people from Wrestling Open, which is up in Boston, Worcester, Massachusetts area. So if I have 50 of those, maybe somebody wants that content. Maybe it's cool. What content do you want? And it's each one has a different cost, essentially. And that could be, interesting as well, where so you want voice actors, or you want Texas voice actors, you want LA voice actors, or you want the whole voice acting thing, or you just want 30 of them, and you can pick and choose what's the price on each of them. Or it could be seasons, or it could be whatever. I mean, I would probably want to license it by season just because it's easier and cleaner.
Yeah.
That's just how I view it. But again, I'm not opposed. If somebody said, I want to license your content, man, and I want year 2 and year 4,
Mm-hmm.
That would be cool. For
Okay.
me, what were you
Sorry.
saying?
I said, like, let's say that I was a wrestling based channel and I came to you and said, hey, I really liked your interviews with all the wrestlers. I want to license just those. It's not like you can't break it up and share it out that way too. Anyway, I just found that interesting. Sorry.
Oh, no. It's definitely something that if somebody said, look, I am a wrestling channel and I need, 30 interviews, what would a license agreement look like?
Mhm.
And they just wanted 30. And I mean, we would set terms, we would set things. Obviously, I would have somebody draft something, I'd have rights come back to me and all that stuff. And yeah, no, I would say, look, what do you want? Because everything's for sale, technically.
Mhm.
And also, I'm smart enough to know that, I'm saying, look, this thing just came out, and
Yep.
I might not want to license a particular interview out. Like, I might not want to license my Lufisto out,
Yeah.
to be very honest. And so that's the other thing, too, is that maybe I don't want to license content out because maybe it draws attention to where I want it to be. And
Mhm.
so it's very, very interesting in that regard. But again, I know somebody, he has the world's largest rock and roll podcast.
Huh.
And what he does is that, and he has all these interviews with people like Robert Plant from Led
Mhm.
Zeppelin and all these people. It's a great show. I mean, guy's been doing it for like 35, 40 years.
Wow.
So he licenses out his content and he makes a good amount of money from licensing out his content to a bunch of different places. And so that's the thing, is that sometimes somebody might say, look, you have 30 Led Zeppelin interviews. I want those 30 on my channel for the next 2 years.
Yep.
And there you go. And so I get it completely in that regard. But again, it goes back to, this is why ownership is so important, because I'm realizing that the real money for me is not necessarily in today or even the viewership. It's more along the lines of, if I get to 1,000 interviews, which I will, maybe somebody will say, look, I want your content. I want certain content that you have on my channel because it's going to make a difference and it's going to be cheaper for me to buy or license that content from you or lease that content from you than for me to do it.
Yeah.
And they might be leasing content from a lot of people. And there you go. And I think that's where things are going with shows in general. I
Yeah.
even think with comics, that's where things are going. I actually think that comic companies in the future are going to lease on terms comics and they're not going to buy them. So they might say, look, we'll give you, $5,000 to push out your book for 2 years under our brand. And then hopefully the rights will go back to you. You don't get a royalty, but they're going to lease the rights to do it. And I think
Mhm.
that's where we're going to be going. Because then I actually think it's a better model, especially if it's a decent book and you got 4 issues. I mean, I would do that, to be quite honest, with somebody's book. I would buy a lease on it for 2
Mhm.
years or 3 years. And now you get the money up front and then it becomes my problem. And so
Yeah.
that's where I think things are going, because I think it's just another way how to structure something, but it's ownership on a short term.
Yep. Yep. And we got to talk one day about royalties because people do not understand the concept of the advance royalty payment either. They vaguely understand. But anyway, that's a whole different thing. But yeah, ownership is definitely vital. Lucas sold the ownership to Star Wars, right? So he had no say, even if he liked or didn't like what was going on. Now, that's the other thing that's something that's really interesting to me, anyway. To me, but I'm a dork, so let's say you license your product, somebody else owns it. Are you then obligated to promote that product? Because, like,
So
let's say Lucas hated the new Star Wars. He can't come out and say, dude, this stuff sucks, right? He has to come out and say, it's great.
if he licensed it out,
Yeah.
I think he either has to shut up or it's you have to say it's okay, good, or
It
you
is
shut
what it
up.
is. Yeah.
So if I license it out to a channel and the channel's not a good channel, I mean, you're not going to hear me going and beating down that channel.
Right.
But at the same time, if you sell it, that's different too. And that's the other thing too, is that there's nothing wrong with selling. I mean, what, he sold Star Wars for what, like $4.5 billion?
Dude, I'd have sold in a heartbeat.
I mean, look at WWE. They're going to be selling soon. The point is that there's nothing wrong with that either. And that's the thing about ownership too, is that there's going to get a point that there may never ever be a point, because I actually like doing what I'm doing right now. And some people have burnout. I don't have burnout. I've been doing this for 9 years. I know plenty of people in podcasts who have burnouts. I don't feel like I have a burnout, but if I ever wanted to sell, that's it. Once you own it, you have the right, and that's an option too, to make a big exit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I'm done. You can.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I like your idea of the no burnout, because you have such a variety of topics that if you're only ever focused on one thing, it is easy to get burned out quick. But you have such a variety of them, and you get to talk to so many different people, especially with the interview process, that it's hard to burn out that way. And the other one was, speaking of WWE and ownership and licensing, I've actually been trying to reach out to WWE's licensing department. Some of them make it so difficult to contact, and that is definitely one of them. But it's because, like you said, so many personalities own their wrestling persona likeness. That how does that licensing work? Like, does the WWE? I don't think they own The Rock, or they own part of The Rock, but not the whole thing. Yeah,
This is a good example.
She owns my drum bag.
Does WWE own this, Charlotte Flair? And it's a very, very interesting position, and it's complicated. And yes and no. Do they own part of Ric Flair? It's complicated. But is Charlotte Flair worth every penny that she makes? You're damn right she is. But it's a very complicated topic, and I think it's something that, like, I'll give an example. Like, I own everything that's on my YouTube channel,
right?
And I don't own Rock Lee, right? But I own that interview that I did with Brian Donovan on Rock Lee. So, I mean, I have a claim to a piece of Rock Lee, but it's complicated.
But let's say I were doing a wrestling board game, and I wanted to have Charlotte in it. Would I contact her for the likeness, or would I contact WWE for the license? See, that's the trick of this kind of thing. And that's what does make licensing and things so difficult to navigate, is because of items like this. For instance, did you ever read, I don't know if you've ever read it, the old Chaos Comics, Undertaker?
I know Chaos, and I know that Bad Kitty was in Chaos.
Yeah, brutal. Chaos Comics, their WWE stuff was amazing 90s work. They did an Undertaker that was the Undertaker, right? It was fun. I loved it for the 90s-ness of it. But if I were to try to make a game using likenesses from not the comics, but I mean from the WWE, it would be difficult to understand whom I would have to contact, and as far as royalties would be concerned. So yeah, ownership is very important. Make sure you own your stuff if that's what you want, or if you don't want to own it and you want to just license out your work or be a pay for hire, you have to make that clear. If you don't make it clear, there's so much opportunity for misunderstandings or unscrupulous individuals to take advantage of you, because not everybody's as nice as we are.
Yeah, and look, you know what it is? It's also the idea that, might not come to fruition for 5 years, and then all of a sudden there's money on the table with something, and that's when it comes about, right?
Yeah.
So right now there's not money on the table with my show for the most part, but all of a sudden, what would it be like if I was pulling in $200,000?
Yep.
Every single month? It's going to get complicated, and it's going to be very, very interesting. So that's sometimes what happens too, is that there's a reason why I protect my content very, very, very well, and I try to do my best. It's something that I don't like at cons. when they do certain things with panels. I have refused to give cons my panels and allow them to record. I walked away from a deal with Crunchyroll saying they owned my content in perpetuity. I did not like that word, and I shot back and I said, "You do not get to own my content and have the rights to do this, meaning that I can't do this panel again." That's what that wording meant. Now, I think they knew exactly what they were writing. And
Yeah.
I said to my dad, and then obviously my father's an attorney, and I read it. I said, "That's what I think this is." And I said, if I'm them, there's going to be a day where somebody's at a con, Crunchyroll's at a con, and they're going to shut that panel down in the middle of it. And I did not work and do a panel for Crunchyroll virtually because of that. Because I did not want them to own my panel. And they don't own my panel. They don't own my work. And I have no desire to give them anything. And I've had people say, "Hey, I'm writing a thesis on this. I'm not giving you my PowerPoints either."
Yep.
So
yeah, and that yeah. Gosh, how do I want to say this?
I know how to read a contract, and I look for keywords, and I get very nervous when certain words come about in contracts. I get very nervous. And then look, it's sometimes somebody's like, "Oh, dude, I didn't mean to offend you. We could just scratch that out. No worries. It's not an issue." Like we're with the guy who was a podcast. He didn't mean what he wrote. And he wasn't trying to buy what I'm doing in perpetuity. He was just trying to be taken seriously.
Yes.
There's a difference. What Crunchyroll was trying to do was they wanted to own the panel without trying to own the panel. It was evident what they were trying to do. But anyway, what were you saying?
No, that's interesting. Sorry, I find this stuff very interesting. But yeah, if I were to write a computer program for somebody, or and they paid me for it, they would own it. But here's the thing: a lot of companies have it in place now where if you do anything creative, it doesn't matter what it is, while you're on company time, they can claim ownership of your stuff. In fact, I had someone try to do this. They actually told me, they said, "Well, we own now part of your board game stuff because you had it on the company laptop." And I said to them flat out, I said, "Look, when I was first hired here, I asked you flat out, can I store it on here? Work on it during lunch?" They said, "Yes, that is absolutely fine. Do that." I made it very clear. And that's the thing that a lot of people do not do. Because again, if you don't get burned, you don't think of these things. And it's an unfortunate. So please, dear God, people, listen to what we're saying, because we're not trying to be jerks about it. We're honestly just trying to tell you, you have to pay attention to these things. We're doing it to make sure that you don't get taken advantage of. That's really the only goal for it. Sorry.
I know people who have stopped working on code for their company, and then at their job and quit because they realized that the code was worth way more and that they would have made a lot more money, and then they quit and then they finished the code on their own time and sold it for a lot more money. And I know people who've done that, and it's not, there's a reason why. Now, I like where I work, and so when I get creative at my job, that's that. But you don't see me working on anything where if I was to build out an automated system that I knew was worth billions of dollars, you're damn right I'm not working on it during company time.
Right. But and you got to be careful, though. I'll be honest with you. You got to be careful. If the company, like that guy that quit, he was paid to do that, and he started doing it on company time, they could actually legally claim part of it because he started doing it on company time if there wasn't that clear delineation. Now, as you said, if you came up with this great idea and you worked at it at home, that's yours. Now, be careful, though, because some companies do have it in their contracts, ownership-wise. Anything you create, even if you think about it during time in the shower, is theirs. There are those style or types of contracts in there. So you've got to be careful with it.
It's also the idea that, honestly, I mean, depending on, I think it'd be very hard for my company to claim my podcast as theirs. I think you're going outside, and also that's the thing too. So if you created a brand new sandwich and you work in, technology and you work in coding and you created a new sandwich that's never been done before, it's going to be hard for the company to claim it because it's so far outside. But if you created a new way how to do a TPS report and you work in TPS reports at your company, you thought about it in the shower, it's going to be easier for them to claim a piece of that.
Right. But again, it's not something that people think about because there are those parts in contracts where the companies will say that. And they I only say it because it's been done where they've created something at home or they've had a cool design and they did it at home, but then the company says, sorry, we own that because in our contract we've said that, and then this happened. It's unfortunate, but it is.
And look, there's been plenty of things where people have fought for it. I mean, look, Brian Polito is a really good example with Lady Death and Chaos Comics and going through hell to get something back. And also, you know what it is, depending on where you work and what company you work at and all sorts of stuff. I mean, obviously, there you go. But, if I create a system that works and benefits my job and I create it on company time, I mean, there might get to a point where it might be more beneficial for me to actually just give it to the company too. And so, especially if you want to stay there, I would like to stay at my job for the rest of my career because it's a good job.
Yeah.
But I digress. I don't want to go too further into that, but it's very, very interesting. Ownership is a big issue. Yep. And I just think a lot of people do not understand it and do not know how to necessarily navigate it. But I think we targeted a bunch of stuff without getting too specific. If I really wanted to use specifics and use people's names and a variety of others, there's about 10 people I could think of that have real interesting positions on this. But we're not going to go down that route just yet. Right. But I do want to give you a chance because I think we covered everything unless you have anything you want to add.
No, I think we've covered this topic pretty well. Sorry, I went on a couple of tangents. That was my fault.
Oh no, it's an open show. It's not. It's an open adult show to talk about controversial issues for a reason. And obviously my foot's messed up and a lot of other things are messed up. Very little sleep, everybody. In case people don't know, I had a surgery and I'm recovering. 2 days ago, guys. 2 days ago. So I'm toughing this out, man. But yeah, I mean, I just want to give you a chance to promote yourself before I wrap up. Again.
Yeah, of course, we're always on the whole YouTube thing. Every Monday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, the Outdoors Indoors. I try to do another show with the board games and so on. Let's see. We have all the games we talked about in the beginning. But yeah, check us out. We're doing a lot of good stuff, and yeah, come along for the ride. We're gonna have fun. So you'll get used to me rambling too. By the way, you'll get used to it.
And then just about me, obviously, I am running the show, Conversations in Pop Culture, Pop Anime Comics on YouTube. The goal is I am at 501 subscribers on YouTube. I would like to get to 510 by the end of March, which I think is very doable. Nice. It's 9 away. I like to set small goals, slowly climbing the mountain. So obviously subscribe on YouTube, which is Conversations in Pop Culture or Pop Anime Comics. Either or is fine. Obviously, I am also on Twitter at Pop Anime Comics, Instagram, Pop Anime Comics, Facebook is Pop Anime Comics. All that fun stuff. I have my ad rates are up there. I am a little pricey, but I am worth every penny of it. At least I think I am. So if you'd like to advertise with me, anybody, my ad rates, I believe, are up there, along with a variety of other stuff that I have going on. And you never know who's going to come on my show, when they're going to come on my show, and what we're going to talk about. And so that's kind of everything that I got going on. And yeah, And if you like this content, give it a like, share it out. And if you'd like to join Embolden and talk about an issue, I am more than happy to have anybody on talking about controversial issues. There's a lot of stuff to talk about that I think people, may or may not be scared to talk about. But on this show, more than happy to talk about all of that. So that's everything I got. And I believe, everybody, that is a wrap.